Is that better? All right, so if I have to talk loud, I will. So in the United States, we have something called HIPAA. And what HIPAA says is that for any like medical websites or anything medical in general, you can't collect certain information. That could be like disease information with first and last name, maybe social security numbers and things like that, because you can't identify the patient. There are things in place to kind of protect patients, giving their information, because insurance companies may look at that and say, hey, this person has a existing condition, we're not going to give them any money to help them for their medication, things like that. So that's why I have to care about security, is because the law forces, me and my colleagues. But also, another thing that I think is very important is that us as developers, I like to think that we're a professional craft, and it's our duty to protect our users and systems that we build. Because if we don't, the end user who looks at us as the expert, they're going to be like, okay, what are we paying these people money for? They're not building it right. So that's why I think, we really should kind of step up and say, yeah, we're a professional class, and it's our duty to make sure our clients are protected. The major reason why we should care is because we're going to lose money. Our clients would just like to walk away to go to a competitor, and then we don't get any more Sitecore John dollars or pounds. So that is why we really should care. So am I saying something's not secure? Yes, I am. And I am saying that web-forms for marketers is not secure. It's a great product. You give power to content authors to create forms on the fly. That's wonderful. They can do all kinds of different things with the form. Have a nice forms report. You can see things in there. It's great. The problem is everything is stored in the database as plain text. So, let's say, and here's an example. Outside of web-forms for marketers, I'm thinking back in 2006, I get a letter in the mail from my bank, and my bank says, hey, somebody may have stolen your credit card number. Well, how did that happen? So I did some research. And then I learned that a major retailer, international, they have stores here in the United Kingdom. I'm not going to name who they are, but they have a DBA who walked away with a hard drive with database backups on it and compromised 2 million user accounts and credit cards and sold them. So then a year later, I have fraud in my account. So the bank didn't issue me a new credit card, but that's pretty much the reality right there. If something is stored in plain text, well, it's very easily wrong. Somebody's just going to take it. And web-forms marketers also stores credit card field information in plain text. Yeah, when you look in the forms report, it says, oh yeah, sure, it's hidden, that's great. But when you look in the database, in the data column, in the fields table, in the web-forms marketer database, you see the credit card number in there, and you also see what type of credit card it is, whether it's Visa or MasterCard, doesn't matter. So, yeah, sure. It's secure. Yeah, from the end user's point of view, yeah, I can't steal it. But if you go into the database, hey, look at that. I have a credit card number. I can go on Amazon, I can buy all kinds of books. Yeah, why not? I'm in coverage, sure. So what can we do about it? Well, we can encrypt data. That's one possibility. We can also, rip out credit card information when the form is submitted. Yeah, I think that's definitely a viable thing. And you can do both of those through the custom web-forms for marketers data provider, or you can do a custom save for database action and rip it out before it's even saved. There's actually a third step I didn't even put on here, which I just thought of now, and I've actually done it. You can do it on a form verification as well, which I don't have with me. But so let's show you. I'm going to show you some code. Definitely. All right, so.
Well, you're a bit quiet back here, if you could speak up a bit.
Can you hear me now?
A bit more.
More? All right, so here is a web-forms for marketers data provider that encrypts data before it's saved into the database. You hear me? All right. Basically, what we have here is using the decorator pattern. Is everybody familiar with the decorator pattern in the game 4? No. All right. So what the decorator pattern is that you'll have a class, a .NET class, and you define an interface for that class or a base abstract class, and you have predefined methods that you need. What you can do is you can create something that looks just like it, but it consumes another instance with the same interface or abstract class. And you can decorate things within the methods. So let's say you have a submit method, you have something that goes inside of it, you save it as like inner property. And you will call it submit method, but you will do things to the data before you pass it down and delegate to the inner object. So that's a decorated pattern. That makes sense? So this is using the decorated pattern. Basically what it does is it takes in a web performance marketer data provider. I actually am using the data provider base here, because that is really kind of like the interface. It's really not an interface, it's an abstract base class, but as it was written, it serves as the interface because that's where the methods are really defined. So you pass it in, and yeah, it's going to use the abstract level. There could be things that are down on the more subclass level that are happening behind the scenes, but you don't even know about it, you don't even care. Everything's being done through the base. So you pass it in, it gets saved in the property of this class. And there's also a default. It will actually, you can set it here. I actually put it, I'm actually using some reflection here. So you can actually create different, you can pass in different ones because this will support SQLite, this supports SQL Server, this supports Oracle. So basically, well, out of the box, you have the type here. You pass in a connection string, but you can also, with mine, you can pass in an inner one as well. And what that will do is I will let you. Sorry. Comment this up. So upset. So here we have a connection string being passed into it. I took out the connection string here, so you don't know what my password is. But we're also passing in an inner one, and this is actually the one that comes out of the box for web function marketers. It supports SQL Server. So, and this is the data provider we just looked at. And so what happens is, inside of the class, it will actually create that using Sitecore's reflection util right here. And you pass in, you pass the connection string as a parameter to the constructor, and then it creates it, it passes it back, it sets it up on the actual property up at the top, and then we're good to go. We can wrap all the methods that are in it. So basically, there are methods that delete things, there are methods that insert things, there are methods that get things. So what we have to do is, on insertion or update, we have to actually encrypt data before it gets passed down to the inner provider. And conversely, when it comes out, we have to decrypt it. But we only encrypt when data is not already encrypted. We only decrypt when it is encrypted. So I built a set of classes for doing encryption. So I have something that I call, an interface called encryptor, which I'm going to show you right now. Basic thing that an encryptor would do, just encrypts, decrypts, and you pass a key. You need a key in order for it to generate some random noise to create, encryption for field values. So I also then created something called an RC2 encryptor. And I'll be honest, I don't know what RC2 is. It's an encryption algorithm that I found in the .NET library somewhere. I don't recommend using this code. It's not very secure. It's very vulnerable. This is just here as an example, to show you how to, implement something like this. There are other encryption algorithms in the .NET library that are a lot stronger, like RSA. That comes with the Sitecore item web API. That's great. This won't support that, but you can actually augment it slightly to make it support it. With that is that actually will use a key, and then it also uses something called an initialization vector, which is something I have no clue what it does, but it also introduces one random noise. It's almost like a one-way key type of thing as well. But I didn't think through on building something like that, but I have something like this. It's similar to something I've written in the past using triple DES. Basically, you pass it data, it'll encrypt it, and then you decrypt data as well using the decrypt method. And then I created another decorator, which I call the data null terminator encryptor, which is really kind of strange. What that really is, and that actually goes back to C programming. Back when you used to have to end a string in C, you had to give it a null terminator, which is a character that says, yes, the string, this is the end of the string, stop. So I call that, because what this will do is it actually will stamp the string at the end saying, yes, I'm encrypted. So that when we pass it off to the encryptor is not going to encrypt it if it's already encrypted, because that's double encryption and it's going to be hard to decrypt it. So what I have in the data provider here is I actually create both encryptors. One gets consumed by the other. So I can find that for you. So there you go. So I create default decryptor, or encryptor I should say. And what that does is it creates a data null encryptor, which gets passed a parameters object, which I call DTO. It's a DTO object, which stands for data transfer object. It's a parameters object. Just like in Sitecore pipelines, you pass it a parameters object. It's the same type of idea. Data transfer, the data transfer pattern is more systemic to communication across different systems. Parameters object will be within the same system. It's the same concept. So this takes in its own DTO, and the DTO has two properties on it. It takes in the data null terminator, which is the string that we stamp, our encrypted string. And then it takes in an inner encryptor, which in our case is the RC2 encryption. And I'm pulling from some settings in a configuration file that I have. Let me show you what that looks like. So here we are. We stamp our encrypted string or field with this. Yeah, it's kind of like screaming, hey, please come and craft this and steal all my data. But I just pointed it out that way so that you can see it. It's kind of like evident that, yeah, we're encrypting things. And then I pass the key. I'm not an encryption, specialist. Oh, that's the other thing. I'm not a security specialist. I don't specialize in this. It takes many years to become an expert. I was told that. So anything that you see here, please do not use it in a production system without talking to a security expert. I have to say that this time. But anyways, I found this key online. I think I found it on Stack Overflow post, but because I needed something to make this work. So let me go back to this. So after we create our encryptors, we have here. Let me show you an example of inserting a form. So we get past a form, and the form will contain fields on it, and we will manipulate the data on the forms and fields. So it gets down here. We actually go through all the fields. It's actually unfortunately named field, but that is a collection of fields. We actually go through all those, and we pass it to our encryptor, and our encryptor will encrypt it. Our encryptor will encrypt it only if it's already not encrypted. If it's encrypted, then we don't. And the way that it's determined is through the data null terminator here in this class. So if it's not encrypted, then encrypt it. Otherwise, we just return it the way it was, and it's just left alone. Conversely, decryption works the same way. If it isn't encrypted, let's decrypt it, and then we pass it back. Otherwise, just pass it back the way it is. So going back here, so I wanted to show you the iteration part. So this is really important. So we go through that, we will encrypt it. And what we have to do here, this is the trick with making the custom web forms for marketers data provider. You have to create a new instance that inherits or implements, I would say, I field, which is I think it's in sitecore.forms.core.dll. There is something in there that's called the definite field, but unfortunately it's internal and you cannot use it, so you have to create your own. The reason why you have to do this is because there's something called the adaptive result control that unfortunately, that's how fields get implemented in web forms for marketers, but the problem is, its base class has a value property on it, which would be the value of the field, but it actually has its own value property, which is a string. The other one's an object. So that one kind of like silences out the other, you know, it's parent. But it has a private set, so you can't change it. So you have to do this, you have to create, you know, some kind of object to represent a field. And in this case, I created something called web forms marker field. It's just a regular C# class, just has properties on it that you can set, get, that's all it does, everything's open. So you have to do something like this in order to manipulate field values and data provided web forms markers. So that's what happens here. We actually create new field objects, and we add it to a collection, and it gets cascaded back up. And then once we get to, like, let's say, the insert form here, we encrypt it, and everything's done by reference because it's C#. Then we pass it, we delegate down to the inner provider, which was created when we created this class. And then conversely, when you do decrypt, it's just that process backwards. You know, it gets passed down to the data NL terminator, which in turn will call the inner encryptor if it's not, if it is encrypted. Otherwise, it just returns it back the way it was. So that's what this does. And let me actually show you in action. Alright, so I created a form. So I don't know if you guys know, but I'm hooked on caffeine. I drink so much coffee every day. Probably at least a pot, maybe a cup and a half. I just can't wake up. So I'm going broke and Starbucks is not cheap. So I wrote a form, hoping that you guys would donate to my coffee fund. So, oh, gotta turn it on. I just got to turn off the out of the box one so that actually something happens. And then I got to turn on the one that actually does the encryption. That's awesome. All right, so let's look at the forms report and see what's going on here. So, so everything looks normal, but nothing's different. You know, I can read this. Everything's great. Hey, look at that. It's hidden. Yeah, it's secure. No, it's not. But if we look in here, we see that, hey, there's garbage. I can't read that. Look at that. It's encrypted. We terminate it with the data terminator string, so that when we pull it out and it's in the forms report, it gets decrypted. We can read it. And then I also blank out this as well, so that, you know, you can't get the credit card information number. And then I also blank out the field name. Just hide everything as much as possible. So that's that. gonna clear this out. Actually, you know, I might leave this in. No, I'm gonna clear it. Alright, so that's great. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna show you a different way of protecting your data. So credit card information, I don't care if it's encrypted and it's in the database. It actually, I think, violates the HIPAA law in the United States. But I'm not sure, but I really am paranoid about keeping things like that. You know, I mean, this isn't foolproof. Somebody can just like walk away with this hard drive. They can get somebody's credit card number if they figure out which encryption algorithm I'm using, and they can figure out what the key is. They steal my, you know, include directory, and we're in trouble. So instead of doing it that way, I'm going to just rip it out.
Mike, about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Alright. Let me do a real quick refresh here. It's going to be upset because I just changed config. So I created another form. It's the exact identical form, except in this case I'm using the save the database action. Is anybody familiar with reference marketers and save the database actions? So in this case, all I do is I go through all the fields and I target something. I target a field by name. And I say, hey, that's the field I want to rip out. And what I end up doing is I just rip it out. So what I'm going to show you is actually what that looks like. So I created a custom save action here. I called it excise field values in save the database. That's a mouthful. It's loading. So you define it here, you tell it which assembly it is, and you give it the class name. And so I actually did that. And it's very, very simple to write these save the database actions. So they all have an execute method. They take in this signature, and then you can do whatever you want to it. You know, send it off to a friend, whatever. Here I'm excising fields that I'm targeting. So in this case, I have an object I delegate to. It's a class where it rips out field values depending on what I have set. So I pass in a list of field names, and then I iterate through them, and I look for what field names are in this collection of adaptive control results, which are web forms and marketers fields that get passed around, you know, in the different steps before it gets saved in the data provider. So I go through it. The should extract just goes through it. It says, does it contain that field? If it does, return true. And if it does, then we just rip it out. And when we rip it out, all we're doing is we're creating a new control result, which is the parent of the adaptive control result class. And we pass in the value of empty, and then we pass in empty data value, and then we just pass it back. We copy everything over. The field IDs have to be the same in order for this to work. So it gets passed up. There's nothing in it. That's great. It looks like it's, you know, web forms and marketer will balk if this isn't there and it won't show up in the forms report. So we have to make it empty. So we have that. We set it on the actual, we set it inside of web forms and marketer, inside of the content tree. And then on the form, we had to actually set that as an action in save actions. And then I have it set there, I saved it, everything's published. And so this is the form. It's the exact same form we had before, except it's a different form, you know, on my website here. Okay. Hey, more. That's awesome. So, go back to the forms report. We're going to look at this one, this is the other one, and then boom, everything's there, but the credit card's gone. And in this case, it's totally gone, right here. Normally, as I showed you in a screenshot before, there were values in here, including the credit card number. I totally rip it out before it gets saved, you know. We don't want that hanging around so that some disgruntled DBA walks off with it and collects money by selling it, or goes on Amazon and buys a bunch of books. So, how am I doing? Alright, so I was going to show you password security. I don't think I have enough time. But I am going to say that I put this out on GitHub, and I would greatly appreciate some feedback. There's a lot of code here. You can find it here on GitHub. I'm going to tweet this later if anybody follows me on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you can find me on Twitter right here. I'd love for you to connect with me. Give me your feedback. Let me know if you have any ideas. Definitely let me know. You can find me here at MedTouch and Reynolds at MedTouch.com. Find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I blog at SitecoreJunkie.com. I'll give you my SMS number, but I think that'd be expensive to go across the seas. But any questions within 1 minute?
Quick one.
Okay.
Why would you bother putting the credit card information?
Can you say that one a little louder? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Why would you bother including credit card information fields on the form in the first place if you're not going to actually store it?
Because I've actually built something where I had to send it off to a third-party processor. So, let's say you have a site like Amazon, and Amazon isn't a credit card company. It will send it off to MasterCard. But they don't want to hold on to that because they're liable. Somebody, like I said, will walk away with that data. So you don't want to save it. But for web forms and marketing, it has to be there in order for it to actually show up in the forms report. For any, it won't block and crash.
Right, so it's for sending them to other parties as opposed to saving yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think, Mike, in the UK, our credit card requirements are very strict. So we have something called PCI DSS compliance here, and that means that there is no way that you would ever consider storing any of that data. And most of the time now, we go to hosted payment pages, which are iframed in. It tends to be the common scenario. So valid point for definitely, yes.
Right.
That's something often gets done with us. Is there any more questions?
I was just curious how many sort of hours you think. I appreciate the level of detail and understanding to get with the web forms and markets module to be able to do this, present it. But how many hours do you think you've spent on this so far?
That is a good question, because I built each piece of this separately in different times. I think the encryption one took about a week just to figure it out and understand it, maybe longer. The ripping out part, I think it only took a couple days. But it was not just, it was like around the clock. I'm obsessive when it comes to code. I just continually code. I go home, if anybody reads my